Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Hey! Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Dear hunter shot Bambi, Bambi took the fall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Yeah. You're not paranoid if they're out to get you. You're not paranoid if they're out to get you.
Good morning. Today is, it's early December. I didn't check the date. I'm not going to look down right now. You notice I'm on a different camera. We'll cover the whys of that in a minute. We're back today in the Tribog area and along the Connecticut state border with Massachusetts, and we're going to check the stream situation, crossover, and try to revisit what we had wanted to do last week, but with the fresh snowfall and all that, it was kind of dicey, so I changed plans and accomplished what I wanted to do at the other site with the one that's closer on this side of the stream. And don't really have a deeper agenda than that. I do have some stuff to cover on a different basis, but one thing that's on my mind, I'm going to get off my chest right now, that has nothing to do with Bigfoot, is based on the week's events. And if this provokes any thought on your part, that's probably a good thing. The very people right now that are dancing on Renee Good's grave are the same people that lost their minds when Charlie Kirk was killed. Conversely, the people right now that are losing their minds over Renee Good's death were the ones, largely a lot of them, dancing on the grave of Charlie Kirk. The moral of the story is, what the heck ever happened to human decency? Help me understand that. Now that we've covered that, we can resume our normal. And again, we are doing a new camera because let's get why don't we cover that before we get in too deep? This is a police body cam, so I'm holding it by its latch because there's not really an effective way to put it on my clothing and keep it from bouncing all over the place, which is basically the problem we're trying to alleviate from today. And if you are in law enforcement and you're out there and you have one of these things and you keep it still, what is your secret? What kind of particular equipment do you have in the way of like a vest or a harness or something that keeps this thing from moving all over the place when you're chasing people and the like? Of course, a lot of your stuff that you have when you're doing body camera stuff, like on the body cam YouTube videos, a lot of it is shaky, so maybe I'm just giving the cameras more credit than they have. I will address the reason for changing things up as I give you a slow pan of the area to try my hand at keeping my hand steady with this. I had a couple of people contact me on Facebook during the week, ironically all from the Granite State, and having interest in getting out in the field up there, and that is something we will pursue with some of them. One of them had contacted me back saying he'd rather not. Number one, I think from observing him and some of his own content, he's a little bit more woo-oriented than I am, which may be part of it, and that's fine. I'll address some of the points of criticism he made, but in all honesty, in the spirit of graciousness, I'll thank you for saving me a road trip if we weren't going to get on well together. That just wouldn't have served any purpose. But anyway, one of the things he did mention was bad video quality. And my defense is I don't have a budget for a $4,000 5K camera, whatever. I don't. I work with what I got, but I also have to admit to a certain amount of laziness. When my H2 gimbal camera died the second time, and the reason why, basically when you take them out every other weekend, 4 seasons out of the year, they wear and tear on them. Notably, high humidity in the midsummer is not kind to them, and it gave up the ghost. And unfortunately, the H2, although I would buy another one in a heartbeat if they were still there, they've been discontinued, and I had to come up with something else. Not making excuses, just kind of telling you the evolution of that. So I had a few other cameras at the time. For primary videoing, I have long since given up on, that's new. I have long since given up on like iCam sunglasses, because when you're walking through stuff like this, your head ducks and weaves. There's just no way not to do that. And that has a less than ideal effect on the quality of the video for obvious reasons as well. And there's no gimbal version of out there I've ever seen. And if they were, number one, I doubt they would live up to the hype in marketing. And they're probably cost preventative too. I also question the quality of them, because I've had some things happen where I had a GoPro survive something that the other camera died and never worked again. That being a care of those iCam sunglasses. So my evolution took me from this to an Osmo, what was it, the DJI Osmo camera, which has a scammy nature to it, because like all the other DJI stuff, it doesn't work until you pair it with the app on the phone. And when it's a drone, that's one thing. Because when you're dealing with a drone, you're dealing with a small aircraft, and they are regulated by the FAA, or if you're in another country, the equivalent agency. Somebody out there is telling you what you can and cannot do with a small aircraft in their airspace, notably around airports and things like that. It's just the nature of the reality of it. And unfortunately, there's more regulation now than there was before, because unlike people like Ham Radio, who are very self-policing of bad actors, there were people that had drones that did dumb things that were clearly illegal. And to kind of paraphrase, that's why we can't have nice things, because people can't be trusted to be adults with them. And some legitimate, some just inadvertent, but still, it puts us where we are, and that's why. But the Osmo is a camera, like this camera. You turn it on, you point it at what you want to video, and you hit record, and that's what it is. That's all it should be. There's virtually no reason why a Chinese company has to track all my videos and have the means of doing this, when really all I'm doing is sharing a hike in the woods. There's really just, that makes absolutely no sense. It's absurd. And that to me is just kind of a scammy thing, because there's no way, and I did try to find no way to my knowledge on how to use at least that particular model of Osmo camera without having to use the app, which just adds a layer of aggravation to it that isn't worth the price, and therefore I returned it and got its replacement, which was a much tinier, daintier version of something like the H2, which is called the Fimi. And the Fimi worked perfectly fine until it died 3 months later. And considering I had it out under conditions in mid to late spring where weather wasn't really that extreme in any way, there's really no right reason why it should have died after 3 months, unless maybe I just got a dud. But given the dissatisfaction I had with that in the Osmo, it was enough to have me think this is not the ideal solution. So I do have a similar kind of camera on the theory of the iCams that is like it's a functional camera like this, but it also has a wraparound, almost like a headset thing like you'd use at work when you're talking to people in a meeting. But if you're walking through the woods, then it has a 2-axis gimbal, but same thing applies if you're walking through woods and you got to duck to avoid branches and things like that. It's better at it, but still suffers from that same defect. Simply put, you can't walk robotically through dense undergrowth and just whack yourself in the face with said undergrowth, because human nature just doesn't work that way. So no FEMI, no iCams. I got that one. I tested it. It is good for some things. If you don't mind a little bit of jerky motion, if you want to watch me launch a drone or something, it gives me the hands-free ability to do that. I think I did that on one video too, just to add that to the mix and see how that works. And it works okay within that limitation, but it's not your EDC camera, so to speak. You have what I'm using now is a police body cam. It does not have zoom. The H2 had limited zoom, so there was that. I can use my phone if I have to zoom in on something, but it is the equivalent of like a GoPro. You turn it on, you record, and you point in the direction it is. Case in point, as I move my hand, you see what I am facing at the time. The separator on this one, though, your GoPro, your iCams, all these tend to max out at 90 minutes of battery life, or if you're in the extreme cold like I was last week, 90 minutes becomes more like 45, 40. Cold drains batteries faster. You can't really compete with the laws of physics. That's how that works. Police body cams, on the other hand, optimally with best settings, can max out till about 8 hours of battery life. In extreme cold, you're still good for, if it's like really crazy cold and the thing doesn't lock up from the cold from that extreme, you're looking at least 2 hours. And it also has built-in night vision, so overall feature package, that's what we're going to try to use today and see if it's feasible to walk through like this, because we're not walking through anything so crazy it's going to be that bouncy, I don't think. And that's the test. We had been using the 360 camera, which is, I got lazy with it, and that's my admission. The thing is, because it had a big fishbowl camera thing, you could load the software and do 360, but that, again, that's a very specialty related thing. Overrated too for what I'm doing anyway. Maybe in a different venue you can do it, but it doesn't fit all venues, and I don't think this one is ideal for. So I played with that a few times, and it's good for artistic effect, but not like going through and doing field work and kind of taking you along on the journey and doing some editorial along the way. Yes, we're following my trail from last week. I mean, if anyone's going to comment on it, yes, we are. But I did get lazy with it, because the downside is, while you can capture more surface area than this with a big fishbowl lens, it also distorts. And if you're walking through, it distorts it quite a bit, actually. So I will concede to this gentleman, despite our difference on opinion on some other things, he had a valid point for that, and I'll thank him for making me reconsider some things. We'll try this. I also have literally a GoPro on a stick. Same stick as the fishbowl was on, but that one stayed home today in favor of these. And we'll see if this is steady enough, or I'll try the other one for part of the video too, as kind of a comparison to see what the best overall option is, given current limited funds. So sorry, not sorry. No, I'm not going to go out and buy a $3,000 5K camera, because right now I just don't have the capital to do that. And I'm not really doing this for the cinematic experience. I'm just doing this to share, like being out here. And it's a fairly organic way of what I'm doing. Other things he brought up, I do want to address. We have some philosophical differences. The obvious one is, I think he leans more towards the woo. Although in my defense, I have been out in the field with people from that side of the aisle, or at least more so than I am, and we have gotten along fine. But everybody has their own sense of that, and I'm not going to badmouth him for that. But Kind of have to watch. I'm noticing there's some slippery spots in here too, notably on rocks. Because we had last week, while it was extremely cold, we are now in the middle of a resurgence of high 30s into the 40s, and there's been a lot of melt. So the snow is now it's deeper. It's also heavier and wetter. So that's why you hear the quack 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 today, because you're in January, and that's what we get in northern Connecticut, southern New England. I've come to call it the slush belt, and it is what we have now. Occasionally you get a nice powdery storm, but they're like more towards the earlier part of winter. We had that last week, and maybe we'll get it again up here, but that's kind of the exception to the rule. Anyway, he also called me negative, and I'm going to counter that by saying I think I tend to be rather blunt and probably speak from the hip, but that's who I am, and I'm not going to go out with somebody if I feel like I have to walk around on eggshells. We're all adults out here. and I talk badly of people. I think that's where I got the impression he's more woo-oriented than I am, because what I'm not going to compromise on is having a high standard of expectations for evidence in the pursuit of this and related things. Or maybe we just have a completely different take on the matter, because when you have people that delve into the whole stick structure thing, I mean, if you notice, there's no shortage of deadfall out here. And there are some that you'll encounter where you kind of stop and look at it like, how did that happen? Because you can't readily explain it. But a lot of it, probably 90-something% of it, is basically just you have trees that are of various stages of attack with, unfortunately, ash-boring insects. And I've covered this before, but you can have a tree that looks perfectly fine, but there's a part in the middle of the tree, this is where my forestry degree comes in, that is the wet pulpy part that gives flexibility to a tree, and that's what these bugs eat. And if it cleans out the tree can look fine for a while, but basically it's dead inside. And if you have a strong enough wind, that flexibility isn't there, and snap, down it comes. And that's where you get 90% of your deadfall / stick structures, unfortunately. At least in this part of the country. As one example, but yeah, I'm not going to apologize for having a high standard for evidence. You should too. If you don't, well, you'll probably make more claims than I am, but fantastic claims require fantastic evidence, and that's quoting Carl Sagan, and I'm not going to apologize for that kind of an approach. He said some other things too that tie into his sense of religiosity, and I'm not going to touch on that because that's a personal thing for everybody. One way or the other. That is a personal thing, and I don't touch that because that's not my business. That being said, I think that's why he feels certain ways, probably. But I'm not going to talk badly about this person, mainly because it's a fundamental philosophical disagreement on the nature of this, and that's okay. Not everybody's going to agree. I've encountered other wooish types that can, and for the record, excuse me, sorry. Coffee in the morning builds up a certain amount of gas. Probably doesn't help that I made bean stew last night because, beans. And again, if anyone has any questions on that, beans, hence the limerick that I'm not going to say for obvious reasons because it's kind of self-evident, but I kind of just brain farted as I was belching. Anyway, the difference is I have been more than able to agree to disagree with other people. There are some people out there, however, who are of the type you have to respect all opinions. Well, to a point. Once you start delving into the truly absurd, and there are those out there, the obvious example is going to be the whole thing with the Zorth and that nonsense. If you buy into that, Needless to say, you and I will not be spending time in the field because I have other things to do, and if that's offensive, well, you stay in your lane, I'll stay in my lane, and that's probably the best way that's going to work out. Needless to say. And you have other people that are out here that are, some are lonely, some are, this is where I kind of delve. This gentleman may take this as bad-mouthing people. I take it as trying to get in their heads a little bit and understand the psychology about the subject, which is a valid part of the greater study of the subject, whether people like it or not. And again, when I say things like it or not, that's me being like from the hip. And I don't attack people solely for their beliefs, but if you're pushing something that crazy, like I said last week, Paulides was delving into the Niflheim fallen angel thing, and that began, I think, with Melba Ketchum, somebody who he is in cooperation with. But that whole thing, again, if you find it negative that I call something a grift, that I think really is a grift, I'm not going to apologize. The woman literally tried to publish her own paper to back up her narrative. And if you know anything about the scientific process, that just isn't how that works. And, well, I published a paper. Yeah, you published you published a document that you're claiming to be truth, but that doesn't, that is an empty play to try to gain cred by doing so, but it is a known fact this woman is a veterinarian and not a geneticist, and therefore it's like me saying I have an interest in legal stuff as a hobby and on a hobby basis. This does not make me a lawyer. If anything, it obligates me to say I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. However, I have read this, and legal stuff is fairly to the point, and it is this, not that. As an interesting aside, that's an interesting way to test AI bots, is to see how accurate they are. Ask it legal questions, because what I've found with that is, again, just go completely tangent off for the subject for a minute. 80% of the time, it will answer correctly, but it's one of those things where the answer is what the answer is. This is the law. If you do this, what is the penalty for this? What does the law say about this? It is worded in a very specific, very overly lawyerly way. And legalese can be incredibly dry, but it's also that way incredibly specific. So when you ask a chatbot these things, I find that 80% of the time it'll get it right. 10% of the remaining 20% of the time it will go for like a federal answer when you are asking for a state-specific answer. So it kind of falls kind of into that nebulous partial credit area. And then 10% of the time, it's just wrong. It'll tell you something, and this is what it'll like, no, I know for a fact, I just read in something like Justia or one of these things, where it gives you a legal statute, and the statute is worded very specifically. Case in point, random example, because I touch on a past story now and again. If a person is caught willfully getting somebody involuntarily committed in the state of Connecticut, and it actually succeeds, and they find out after the fact that the person lied willfully, as opposed to making an honest mistake, that person is subject to up to a year in prison and a $10,000 fine. You have specific numbers. You go across the border into Massachusetts or Rhode Island or Vermont. They may have a similar law in the books with different penalties that are slightly different, and that's what I'm saying when I'm saying it's that specific. I have some dubiousness I'm going to be able to get it across the stream again, but we're going to check anyway. A little cautious optimism to see if we can do that or not. Yeah, so 10% of the time they're just wrong. And depending on the AI model you're dealing with, I'm going to go into IT mode for a minute. Depending on how good it is, or if it's a watered down one, or something with a more specific purpose. And some of them are meant for some very specific things. So you're getting, they call them language models, and if you're only getting a subset of the language model and then try to make it do something it can't, it isn't gonna. It's either not. It'll either flat out tell you that's not part of my scope, or it'll do it and do it really bad, because that's not what its focus is. And this is one of those things. Because if you take something that's good for, we'll call it generating code. Code is specific. To answer what the law is in a specific set of you're making it have to think to some degree. Even though it's like a set of records and it can go and Google the answer, it has to know and be able to differentiate between like state and federal and municipal laws, because they are all different. Law is a very complicated thing, painfully sometimes. Let's have a look at this and see if this is like more discernible today, or if I'm going to get my feet wet, because I really don't want to do that. It's not that cold, but in this weather, I could drop the camera in the water. It's a police camera, so it's probably resilient to a point, but let's see here. This is my jump off point. So I can probably do this. The other week we had like a mound of snow on both sides, and you're guesstimating. And it's probably not that deep, but if you slide and mess up, you're going to land with your butt in the water, and then nobody likes walking around with a wet butt in the water on a cold day. That's not fun. So I'm going to take a break. I am going to do a thing here where let me back away from the water with that when I turn the camera off. It was jumpable. I just wanted to have both hands free so I could focus on that and not slip. Tried that a week ago and I slipped pretty quickly, and I'm all right, I don't want to go and deal with, like I said, wet butt. But getting back to the guy, and which if I can speak, which could have been nothing more than a simple philosophical agree to disagree situation. There are people out there, if you're talking about me talking badly about somebody, if they're a grifter, they're a grifter. I'm not going to be nice to them. There's no reason to be. And maybe the guy is a Polites fan. Some people like 411. What I see, though, is a person who is exploiting unresolved missing persons cases and putting a narrative and a spin on it pointing towards a paranormal thing, when a lot of this simply isn't that. A lot of people that go missing in national parks and things sadly go in unprepared and die of exposure. I mentioned the one last week about the girl in Vermont in the late 40s who passed away. And more than a few versions of the story are people observing they didn't feel she was dressed for the conditions as it got colder at night. And if you've ever camped out in Vermont, once the sun goes down, even in midsummer, it gets cool pretty quick. So in the winter, it only goes faster, and the cold up there is an extreme cold. What I mean by extreme is, I was up there once, and I told you this already. When I got up there, it was 22. And about 2 in the afternoon, the sun started going down slowly, but in the course of 45 minutes, it went from 22 to about 13 degrees. That is a large drop, and once you get into single digits, if you don't have a means of getting out of there, or you don't have the means to be prepared for that extreme of a cold, or a level of cold. I apologize for my excuse me. I have a persistent itch in my throat that doesn't want to let me talk. At that level of cold, you either are prepared with the right gear, or you shouldn't be out there, frankly. Playing into the New Hampshire law I referenced last week. Because a lot of people do that, and then they gotta come get you, and you put other people at risk too. Kind of a selfish, clueless thing to do. It could be argued I don't need my coat today, but it is 38 degrees. Not that cold, but cold enough. There's no wind really, so it's not that bad. And if I were to get turned around in here today, you have snow, so you can backtrack, so it's not that hard. But never say never, number one. And number two, it's going to rain later. And the time I keep referring to where I did get lost slightly, it wasn't the amount of time I was actually lost. It really wasn't that far. But the weather conditions and my arrogance and ignorance at the time of thinking I was going to be out there for like 20, 30 minutes, because I really just went out to get out of the house. And then got interested in tracking a moose to see if I could find the animal. Got turned around, and the rest is history. But it was drizzling rain the whole time, and my fleece that I had on, the only real protective layer from the cold, got soaked. It's a high-tech fleece, so it actually did keep from bleeding off body heat, but the minute you stop, the autonomic shivering response would begin, and that is hypothermia knocking on your door. And that is it's potentially really dangerous, especially if you're trying to think you're macho and you're not, and you can just shrug it off. Don't do that, because you can't. Once you're shivering, you're going to notice pretty quick you can't stop. And once you're at that point, your body is sending you some very clear messages you need to get warm. Because your core is cooling down to a level that is really not good for you. And been there twice. You don't want it. It's really, really not pleasant. As I move away from this, I'm trying to just cover all the talking points this guy brought up. Negativity. If you're the kind of person who likes things rosy all the time, and I feel like I'm going to have to walk on eggshells around you, we're probably not going to really be compatible out in the woods. That's fine. You know, to each their own. You have your approach, I have mine. Good luck with yours, but I will probably go about things differently. It is what it is. But I am also human, and again, beans. You will hear me belch once or twice today. You'll probably hear me fart once or twice too. So, yeah, the human body makes certain noises when you're relieving gas. It's not a decency thing. You're out in the woods too, so. I mean, granted, there are other things that happen that you're not going to see on camera, but those things happen too. Everybody poops. But if extreme honesty is not your cup of tea, well, okay. But I'm not going to badmouth the guy. I'm just going to agree to disagree with some elements of what he said, and I will accept valid criticism of some things too. The one thing I am going to take issue with, though, is he said, no one's going to tell me that my experiences aren't real. They didn't happen. I never said that, dude. Simply put, I never said that. Clearly I was not there the same time you were, so clearly I wouldn't know. And by the same token, I've seen and experienced things you weren't there for, so you're not qualified to really say one way or the other either. One of the big standing peeves I do have with skeptics is how quickly and dismissively they can assume something is something that it wasn't, and again, they weren't there. And you usually don't get a well-reasoned response back past that, because they've already debunked it and moved on to the next thing. That's what they do. But where's the easiest way up this? Because I don't want to keep cutting that way per se. I already know that I can get in that way. I want to go to the other one if I can get up there. And since we're on the other side of the stream, that is doable. What I was trying to do last week, let's cover this guy first, and then we'll move on to the next subject for continuity. I never said that what you had happening never happened, and I think we have talked more than once, and he had some wood knocking situations going on or something, and I wasn't there to hear what you heard. So I'd have to go back and read some, because I have I think I have a report from you. And no, I'm not going to take it down. You gave that voluntarily, so. I also don't claim any intellectual property over it, so if I don't use the witness's name and all that, it's a story that's one of the great many, and I'm not going to get into a whole intellectual property thing with you over it, because that kind of thing does happen. And having been on the outskirts of some disputes like this in the past, I will forewarn you, I do know how the law works with that. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but copyright law is pretty straightforward. Okay, so that is, I don't think it's canine, that's something else. I don't think it's feline either. I think that's, what would be that big with a stride? Maybe it's feline. It's not canine though. Canine's different. The canine would be wider. I mean, not wider, longer. So I'll follow these for a way, and when I see a good one, I'm going to take a photo, and then we'll throw it to the comment section. What is this? It's one of those. It could be a few different things, and I'm not going to assume one way or the other. But it's one of the interesting ones because it's not like deer, moose, or a person, or a squirrel, or vole, which are the most common things out here. When you come around the corner here, there goes Bambi. Fairly common. This one's a little bit more it's something in the fisher cat, bobcat size from the stride, but could be a fisher cat for all we know. We do have them out here. I had that weird encounter with the two people that were out here, and they claimed they were doing a fisher cat study, presumably for the state or someone, but I don't know. That's what they said. They're kind of naive though, because if they're the people if they were the people that I think owned a very high-end trail cam, they left it out in the brazen open. So unless they have a tracking device on it, it was like a sitting duck for somebody who wanted it for themselves. Sadly, very trusting, and I'd hate to see somebody lose that expensive a toy. Yeah, I'll not be superstitious. I'll go under this thing. I'll just do it quickly. Anyway. Never said that, but as far as the philosophical stuff, I will just say we agree to disagree, because I'm not going to touch on religiosity, because I don't debate that with people. You got yours, I got mine. And that's a whole other subject that I'm not going to delve too deeply into. I don't try to touch politics, although the one thing I did need to point out in the opening segment of this, I'm going to call it a philosophical observation, but the message I said, again, pretty to the point. I also posted it on Facebook last night, and I turned off the comments because somebody else had posted something similar, and it resulted in the very basis for the observation in the first place. People just started pointing fingers at the other side, and thoroughly not the point. But I'm going over some rocky stuff, so I'm going to just pay attention, and then ultimately we're heading down that way, and the open pseudo wetland, the briar patch as I call it, is going to go cut that way, and I'm hoping we'll find a open spot, because the one down the hill down there, most of the western half of it is swamp and undergrowth, and pricker bushes and wet feet inducing swampiness of indeterminate depth. Not ideal. Way on the eastern side, however, it opens up into a meadow. So there actually is conceivable habitat there. It's not the easiest thing to find or get to, too. You have to kind of you have to be intimate with the land like a deer or like a bow hunter, not like the guy that's in his pickup truck and only goes in 100 feet, like the bow hunter guy who goes in kind of like I am and covers some distance. Hunting philosophy is a whole nother rant too, but not today. I think that's really all I got though. I mean, you have some valid points about my getting lazy with the camera. So thank you for making me think about that. Philosophically, we're two different people. That's just kind of how that is. But notice I didn't badmouth you. I didn't drag you through the mud. I think this is where we differ. If you're sensitive to the point where you think that's insulting, well then that just makes a greater argument for our incompatibility to head out together, because I'm not going to drive all the way up to the middle of New Hampshire and then spend an afternoon bickering with somebody who doesn't agree with some things I think about in a given way. And like I said, I've been out in the field with at least two different people that lean much more into the woo side of the phenomenon than I do, and we got along fine. I'm not going to mention names because that just isn't part of where this is going. I just when people leave criticism or something in the comments or somewhere else to the same equivalency, I do address them, and I hope I did today with an element of diplomacy, that I was kind of just diplomatic. The camera's shaking. I'm trying to get a better grip on it, so I try to minimize that, but we're going to have a moment or two when that happens. Hopefully we're doing better than we were with the fishbowl one, because that does... You don't even have to move it around. The fishbowl level effect itself can lend to distortion. Those are old moose tracks that are up here. Probably the same ones I was harping about a few weeks back, where I thought I was following my own for a bit and then realized the stride's a little wide for me, so more likely it's bullwinkle kind of coming through, because we do have a few of those in the neighborhood. Heaven forfend I ever actually see one. That would be cool, but despite being blind as a bat, they can hear you coming and smell you coming from a long ways off. So one could assume that deodorant is not a naturally occurring smell, and they know that that means something's up, and they leave. Bears are the same thing. They may not carry you there, but they smell you a long ways off. They have a very good sense of smell. So that's as deep as I'm going to go into the situation with him. As for other matters, I have a question for the audience, and that is, I heard on Facebook that Monster Quest was returning, which, as far as I'm concerned, and don't kill the messenger, this is solely my opinion, it is by far the most varied and probably the best modern attempt to redo something like In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, because it's more varied. And it's not that I hate Finding Bigfoot, but Finding Bigfoot follows a very regimented, repetitive pattern, and if you're just going to go and talk to a bunch of local witnesses and then go out for an overnighter and not find anything, you're going to hold my interest for so long, and then like, okay, let's do something else, because what you're doing, I got it, let's do something else now. Some people, I guess I'm going to badmouth a few other people, because there are people that are weirdly loyal to, as fans, to a certain show, to the point where, God forbid, you find a legitimate criticism of it. Finding Bigfoot would be one. The one I don't understand the loyalty to, though, is Expedition Bigfoot, because the entire first season has been proven to be enacted. It's actors doing acting stuff. And some people like that, and if you're watching it for entertainment, so be it. I'll admit I have a amusement level appreciation of mountain monsters, because I'll say it again, the Sheep Squatch episode is just pure comedy gold. That one's funnier than funny should be. But they delve into some interestingly weird stuff on that one. And they have a guy named Huckleberry. That's priceless. I'm sorry if you're from the South and that's more normal. We don't have sweet tea up here as much, and we don't have guys named Huckleberry. Although somebody named Huckleberry, probably on an amusement level, would probably be pretty popular up here, just for standing out as something unique. But something tells me, because that is all acting, that's not his real name. I'm also not going to badmouth the Passive Point, because what is that bug that's out here? You just like some kind of bug, or you a mosquito? Because it ain't that warm. I don't need to be bitten by mosquitoes in the cold. That's one thing about hiking in the winter. Hello. 1 second. As I hear something, I also realize that I don't know what the quality of the audio reception on this camera is. I guess that's a test for today too. Guess it was nothing. I find it amusing, though, some of the absolute loyalty some people have to Finding Bigfoot. Not that one, but I mean, or the one, like I said, what I don't get is the whole Cinnabar Mine nonsense from Expedition Bigfoot, and then it translates to, you have these people that are then the mainstays at a conference, like they're experts, and more than a few people have actually made that reference, where it's like, well, I'm on TV, so I must, just because you were on TV could be a matter of luck, you were in the right place at the right time to score a TV spot. And don't get me wrong, I have been approached a number of times by people doing similar projects, and I just my problem with doing that is, if you go out and you do something with a film crew, they're going to make it what they want for ratings, and you lose control creatively over what you do. If I ever got the gumption to actually make a documentary of some kind, at some point maybe I will. The thing that prevents me right now is this thing called a job, and it would be a prolonged presence in an area like this over the course of a week or two, and it would be a lot of, it may not be the most exciting thing, but the best thing, if you had like an activity thing, a pattern of activity going on, we'd pursue that, and we'd cover more of the actual field work. Which is a rule I usually do off camera, just because that way I'm not distracted with an ulterior motive. But kind of this, I guess I am bad mouthing some of the aspects of Expedition Bigfoot, making it into a conference, and I'm not attacking people for going to conferences. If you're going there, it's like going to a convention. You're going there for a common interest. Furries have conventions. We have Comic-Cons. My nephew and my brother-in-law go to things like that, and they love it. And, you know, if that's your thing, okay. Some people do Ren fairs and that kind of thing. I've been to one. I don't personally see the appeal. It was fun and interesting one time. But if I'm going to say for myself, it was mainly more for the novelty. I'd never done it before. Now that I've done it, we're good. I don't think I'd have to go back and do it again and have an overly salted turkey leg and beat a guy in fantasy sword fighting with foam fake swords, because I took Kenjutsu for a long time, and it was basically, able to beat him on some basic techniques. And it was just kind of funny to me, as a total aside, the techniques that he would use to actually beat people. He would just do this like straight down head bop thing, and one of the first and most basic blocks you get in the Kenjutsu class I had was a counter to exactly that. And it kind of blew him away. He tried that one time with me, and I'm like, no, you're going to have to earn this one. And I beat him easily because it was just a matter of that. We went back for a second one to settle it. That was closer to a draw, because once he saw some of my tricks, then it was more of a legitimate chess game. But he was doing this against 14-year-old kids, and my girlfriend goaded me into doing it, and we did. But like I said, it was fun one time. There's probably a lot of things I would do and have be fun one time. On a completely other aside, you'd be a whole lot more likely to get me to jump out of an airplane and do skydiving than you would to have me bungee jumping, because the reason for that simply is a philosophical one. If you make a mistake skydiving one time, you never have to do it again, because I would only do it once. Bungee jumping, you have so many things that could go wrong, and no thank you. For any one of a number, pick your reason why. I'm not doing that. Yeah, I'm just not going to do that. I think we're going in the right direction, because I wanted to go further west towards the briar patch this time to see if I can find, like I said, an open spot. I see it, I think, down the hill. Whether it opens up or it's just more of the undergrowthy, swampy goodness is the question. I'm trying to find an opening to get in there. Probably in warmer weather, but because it's easier to discern where the wetness is. Because what I was describing in the other bog is swampiness of indeterminate depth. I have a few war stories from places in Vermont where it looks like you might go up to your mid-thigh and you end up kind of like level with your mid-chest, and that's not fun. It's also rather cold, even in midsummer. It's mountain water. Swampy, black, nasty mountain water. But you learn to look before you step, needless to say. There's a whole skill set of, I'll just call it forest ninja-y, doing that kind of a thing. Because Vermont definitely does have some unique terrain. Notably, you're walking out on a meadow and you suddenly realize that you're on like a waterbed-like thing of moss. Most of the time, it's not so waterlogged that you break through. When you do, emphasis mine, indeterminate depth. Be careful in that, because I don't think it would kill you, but there are some interestingly dicey things that can happen in Vermont. Probably other like climates too, but I mean, like moose have died getting stuck in the mud in the middle of a deep enough pond. They can't get out, and they just die. You have these weird moose carcasses in the middle of a pond where they just got stuck in the mud, and because they don't have opposable thumbs and they don't think, they're prone to panic, and then they get tired. And they sink a little more, and before you know it, there's this big dead carcass in there that's probably attracted every scavenger for 50 miles, given the amount of score that would be for them. But kind of a potentially dicey step there. But I didn't really intend to cover conferences and my just lack of interest in them. I'm not going to say they suck. And where we're heading, we're going to come down parallel to the briar patch. It's right down there, but it also, I can always see it's kind of scrubby in there, so we'll start working our way that way to see if we can find a more open spot. That was our overall goal for the day. Kind of more of a mapping, depending on conditions, but conditions are agreeable enough, we're doing it. And we can kind of go windy through here, because as you can see, you just backtrack through your tracks. It's easy enough. And you're not really going in so radical a distance you're going to get that lost. Knock on wood. You're basically going over the hill at a windy angle, but you're still you're like over a hill in a dale, and then you go back over the dale and the hill, and you're back basically where you started, and then you walk back adjacent to the pond and get back to your car, and you're on your merry way to dinner plans with your significant other later. But why does she not come out with me? Because she's not woodsy. She does other stuff. Long story short. But that's one aspect of why I'm not really into conferences. When they start throwing up people that were on TV as the experts, that's not really accurate. If there was an expert in this with any credibility, it would have been one of two people, and that would be either Bindernagel or Meldrum, because they were actual scientists that put a lot of scientific thought into the subject. People like Matt Moneymaker and people like that are more what I would call celebrity Bigfooters, only because a lot of people know their name. And I'm sure that Matt has no shortage of ideas and theories, because he has been doing this for a long time. He'll be the first one to tell you that. But maybe that does open up a little bit. Let's go look. But he's made some claims that make me question that. Let's just say that. We probably wouldn't see eye to eye on everything. We probably would agree on some things, though. But I did actually meet, when they had a town hall in Connecticut, Cliff Barrickman and Bobo. I mentioned that, I think. And Cliff is an interesting guy because he, just to kind of gush for a minute, I don't know if he knows any more than I do. He's out in the field enough to have his own thoughts on the subject, though. It's interesting. I guess Washington people have that same kind of like Midwestern charm thing that people from the Midwest have, where it's just like they're nicer as a rule. You didn't grow up near Manhattan and have that lovely little mindset, well, rub off on you. Which is something I've had to remind myself when you meet people from other parts of the country. It's not that they're creepy because they're so nice. It's that because you literally live next door to Manhattan. You're kind of the jerk because New England people tend to be standoffish that way. Talk faster and they're more aggressive, and not to touch on that or badmouth people from certain, there are differences, and then like people down south tend to be nicer and move a little slower, which is not a bad thing. Just it's different. I'm sure if I went down there and spent some time down there, I might slow down too and probably get on with people well enough. They're not that different, but then again, I naively think that if you got governments out of the way and just had people get on with each other as people, they'd probably do a much better job of it. Because once you're dealing with somebody face to face, it does kind of even things out a lot, I think. This is probably very close to where I started before, and as you see, it's a lot of undergrowthy. It's almost like the New England answer to a mangrove. A lot of rooty, a lot of wet swampiness in between trees and exposed roots and things, which is basically what I think a mangrove is. But because it's all undergrowthy and stuff too, it's the briar patch by name. Going that way, we're going to go that way for a while because it does look like it may open up a little bit in there. There's at least a couple of parallel spots where you can kind of poke through and see what you got going on over there. So maybe it does open up. Pick up where we left off 2 weeks ago on this. If you noticed, I tend to be kind of methodical in my efforts, especially this time of year, because going north is not as readily available in that area. But getting back to the original thing, a couple of people had contacted me from New Hampshire. I ironically probably know more people in New Hampshire than I do from Vermont. There is a stick structure in training, but you notice it broke, and why is probably because of wind. Although, if we look at the pulpy part of this, what I'm doing right now is something also that kind of makes me nuts. We have people that like they'll take a picture of a stick structure. You're clearly off the trail, and you only get that one angle that makes it kind of look like something. You're right there 20 feet from it. Why don't you walk up to it and cover it from all angles? That's honest research. Because there are those pictures I've seen of things like that. You're basically playing on the pareidolia factor. And yeah, I briefly mentioned Monster Quest again. My question was, because I did look around on the History Channel where apparently it is. I can't find new episodes. Are we just talking about reruns of the old ones, which is fine, because I haven't seen those in a while. But or are they making new ones? Because that would be cool, provided it's done with the same level of effort they had in the earlier versions before they started talking about dog-sized spiders and some of the more iffy subjects out there. But should we ever live in a world where we have confirmed dog-sized spiders, though, let me be clear, I'm not going anywhere outside the house without a backpack full of Raid on my back. And already like a Ghostbuster-like freaking water cannon version of that, because that's a game changer for me, and not in a good way. By the same token, I don't believe in Dogman per se, but if I ever run into one and it's the Wolfman or something like that, guess what I'm going to do from now on? Suddenly I'm going to be a whole lot more into stamp collecting, and the woods are going to be a lot more judicious. As it is, after having a run in Vermont a couple years ago, I don't go out in the woods without packing now. By packing, yes, I mean gun. Yes, I mean gun. And when I say gun, I mean gun with like 2 or 3 extra magazines in case I do run into something disagreeable and I need to finish things. If you're going to do something, you don't do it like just gratuitously. You do it because you may have to mean it. Some people aren't cool with that. It is one of those touchy subjects, but for the people, just to touch on this, and I don't think this is thoroughly political, it's more philosophical. For the folks that would like say, well, I don't feel safe, like, well, you know what, I paid the fees and I went through the legal loopholes or the legal hoops to get the permit that says I can, so that's where our conversation on the matter ends. That's a weird track, but that literally is like a deer double step. Just to point that out as I see it. And that is, I have gone from basically being kind of like gun agnostic to, I guess I am at this point one of those from my cold dead hands kind of people, because self-defense is a fundamental human right. Legality, the law, things of this nature have nothing to do with it. Any form of life has another form of life come to try to deprive it of life. It has a self-preservation instinct. And for a Congressman, Chris Murphy, I'm talking to you, buddy, to tell me that that's not legal, your irrelevance is duly noted in that conversation. And notice when I brought up the subject matter in the beginning of the video, I didn't touch on the political divide that is obviously there. I'm not touching on that today. Too deep a rabbit hole. That's not why we're here. So a lot of what you're seeing, this one's actually worse than the other one. The other one wasn't this thick. This one is really thick. You got all these little undergrowthy things you'd literally have to be shoving your way through, and then if you're up to your ankles in swamp water on top of that, it's not really that hospitable. So we try to get over here to see if it opens up. If it doesn't, then we will again try to have to triangulate on the other side to where it is, and that means I have to leave certain two-way considerations at home because I'm not legal on that side of the state line. Which again is a whole nother political rant about the nature of gun laws, and we're not doing that today either. Needless to say, they vary from state to state. We'll leave it there. I will offer the advice, though, that if you go down that road and you decide you are going to carry, you really do have to educate yourself on the specifics of every law in every state because of what I just said. They are different. Know the rules to the game before you try to play it, I guess. What else? As far as New Hampshire goes, the one gentleman I did respond to in terms of comments, we will not be meeting up with you. I think we're too different, so that's fine. Not the first time I've talked to somebody and we just decided it wasn't going to be a workable thing, and that's fine. I would rather do that and handle it with an element of informed maturity than go out and then get into bickering. This does open up. Making me have a sudden weird perception we're not where we think we are, but we're not. Because there's a big wetland over there that's easily accessible from the far side of a given pond and boat launch. And it does look like it opens up. The question is, if it's that, this is connecting a little bit differently, because I thought that was like a lot further over that way. If I'm wrong, that's an interesting little thing I'm going to have to study on the map and see where I was wrong in that perception. And of course, I mean, this thing is this big, long, multiple hundreds of yards long morass of undergrowth, and if that's what it is, then I'll try to attack it from the other side and just say, from over here, there's enough of this surface area where it's just not worth getting near that. Or do you come up on this thing from a weird angle? Because no, you're not. You're just not near that. That little weird trunk thing with a hole through the middle is very reminiscent of a spot I recognized from an encounter I had in 2012 with one that is likely no longer in the area, because of the ones I have encountered, when you're asking how big they are, 2 were not that big, honestly. They're like 6.5 feet, not much bigger than we are. Broader in the shoulders, but not huge. The more elusive number 3 probably comes in, or based on track size, anyway, somewhere closer to the 7-foot mark. The guy that I saw around here fits the legendary bill of something that's like well over, like 8 feet and up. I'm not going to hazard a guess. He was not tiny. He was huge. So when you say I don't believe in your experiences and I act very, very skeptical, I do. But not based on it's not out there, but based on the experiences I measure yours against mine with, if I have enough to go on. If I don't, then fair enough, I wasn't there. Okay, is this the same one? No, it isn't, because if you look down there, it's still a bunch of undergrowthy, thorny, not so much mangrove over here, it's just like straight up undergrowth and like thorniness. But plans for Vermont, there are some people who have mentioned locations in, not Vermont, New Hampshire, have mentioned some locations, and in response to anything coming from a certain Mr. Bolton, no, I'm not going to tell you where they are, because you're exactly the kind of person that runs into a person's fishing honey hole, and before you know it, everybody in the county knows where that is. I'm sorry if that offends you, but that's how I feel about it, and that's how it is. You're exactly the kind of person that you don't tell that to. And if that's the kind of thing that the other gentleman from New Hampshire is going through, this just doesn't stop being undergrowthy, I don't think. Because the terrain's changing over there. And this is not. Let's see. Because if anything, from here, I can kind of, I'm up on a hill, I can kind of gauge the width of it, and then It's not totally into Massachusetts, though, because there's a trail that literally is along the state line, and that's a good marker. And I've hit it on this side over that way. We're not near that. We're actually moving away from it deeper into Connecticut. Not majorly, but enough. And this we're going to go around one or two more corners, but it doesn't look like this on this side is any better on this side. Maybe next week we'll start moving north. Yeah, you can't actually, because then you hit the Massachusetts side. I've hit the trail, and on that end, actually, I replayed that in my memory. It didn't get any better over there either. So naming it the Briar Patch was probably sadly fitting, because it doesn't get better. And if I understand the terrain of this area correctly, you have that rise, and the big wetland I was thinking is on the other side of that. So now I'm going to have ability to put in my head the vicinity of this to the one over there. Because if I got to the one over there and got turned around, I could just walk around the periphery of it and then walk back out to the trailhead on the other side. And then I have a longer walk back to my car, but at least I know where I am. That's kind of how I solved the situation when I got lost the first time that I keep referring to. I could have gone back up the mountain through a very windy, nasty trail. It's like a overgrown. At one time it was an ATV trail, and then it got overgrown, and it can be done, but after everything I'd already been through, I was kind of done and wet and cold, and I was on a road that was going to take me up to a side trail where I go up a slight rise and then bang a left and go back towards my car that way. And it would take me longer, but at least I was continually moving, which is better for body heat maintenance, and I knew where I was going at that point. In a case like that, my logic is stick with what you know and you'll get back. You start playing games with assumptions, that's when you get more lost. And let me get right there by that tree and we'll see because this does not look like it improves much. If I'm wrong, we'll try to angle down and get to the edge and take a look inside, but it isn't looking like it. It's not the same. It's not the same wetland, but it is not looking like it. And like when you say mangrove, it's like all that laurel stuff is in your way too. Not that you can't bulldoze through that, but in the summer, ticks. Needless to say, because we have had a cold stretch, I'm hoping they have had a die off. This all looks like high grass, which is suggestive of swamp. I'm going to go over kind of parallel up on the hill where we can have a looking down into and see if there's a more open spot vantage point and see what's there. So I have a couple of areas in Vermont. I keep saying Vermont, in New Hampshire, that I will do the map phase of, kind of look at the terrain and where you get to, where you can leave the car, logistical things, before making a run up there. It ironically isn't really any logistically further than the spots in Vermont. Yeah, so let's get a little higher, but from here it does not look like you get a lot better here. We're going to go up to where that tree is, the darker one here, and then look down the hill and see if we get a better vantage point, but it doesn't look much better. It changes a little bit, but all of that is, this is where I do wish this camera had a zoom, but it doesn't. Neither does my other one. Unless there's a feature on there I'm not aware of. But if you look at that, it's a lot of undergrowth, tall grass. Although it does open up more, so you could actually get, if you're a big hairy monkey person, you want to go down in there. And I know some people don't like being calling them that, but That's one of the eternal debates of what we deal with is what are they? I take the honest route. I have no idea. They're not human. They're not. It's not a straight ape. It's not an ape. It's not a human. It's something else. As to delving into the whole Niflheim need for biblical literacy and all that, when you start making claims like that, my only real response I can give you is prove it. And if you think that is sacrilegious, my response to that, and this is the one time I will kind of touch on pseudo-religion, is you're trying to apply a holy book based on a person or a savior born in the Middle East to a phenomenon in the forest in a completely different part of the world. And I'm not the one who's trying to cut off the edges of a puzzle piece to make it fit. I'll leave that there. And I don't think that's being sacrilegious. It's two things that don't necessarily. You're trying to put an apple next to an orange, and it's not the same thing. And that's as far into that debate. It looks like I can go through down here and poke out and look and see what the nature of the actual ground is. If it's dry, you can probably ply through this stuff, but it is pretty thick, and what the end reward is a matter of debate. But let's pop in and have a look. Because right up until this point, you have a lot of that, like, low hanging but really thick tree, gnarly. Maybe it doesn't get any better. But you can see how thick this stuff is. And that is, I mean, there's patches. You could probably maze your way through this, but my question is, in the warmer weather, how dry is that? Because it really isn't worth it. This is like, when you have all this stuff to go through, you got to find the little deer path. I'm going to call it a deer way through here, as opposed to a doorway, a deer way, where they can kind of angle through, and then you kind of get your picture. I'll go a few feet more this way, but it does not. My optimism for an entry point is limited because you have all this. I'll almost call it like a laurel mangrove, because it's that thick. It's like all this root stuff on the low level. You're not gonna easily power your way through that. So, and some may say you wasted your time coming down. No, because now you know it's not easy to get in there. You see a lot of laurel, not a lot of way in. Back up the hill for a moment to look at another angle and see if there's a way through the laurel to get down there. I don't see it though. Really doesn't open up to anything that navigable either. Navigable. Because when it opens up in the grass like that, that's swampy. So what we're going to do now, as far as this leg of our journey, we're going to find out how to get over to the side over there, because that looks more open down that way. I got to figure out how to go to the other trailhead and link up with that side. It's not like it can't. This thing is huge. It's like it got to be at least 800 meters long. Which means on a map it's not really hard to find. Thought I heard something. But some places to look in New Hampshire, which means I have to go and check some sighting maps, historical for patterns too, in the nature of where these areas are. I know I have 7 or 8 different sighting reports from New Hampshire in that relative area. So I will review those and reacquaint myself with those circumstances, and we will make some longer term plans to get up that way a few times. Since Vermont has been quiet in the last 2 or 3 years in some ways. We're also into the early part of January, and I haven't heard the infrasonic thing either, but I'd also observed that the conditions are not exactly the same. We had a snap in the colder 20s, but not, when it's happened, it's been cold, like single digit cold, which may very well be a naturally occurring phenomenon relative to the temperature, but it's not expanding ice and all that, because it literally sounded like a subwoofer's feedback. It was more like you're looking around the corner to see where the UFO is going to come up out of the woods and fly over you, and hopefully you're not going for a field trip you didn't ask for around the Milky Way. Not that that wouldn't be cool, but you don't know what their intentions are. That's a whole different that's a whole different realm of the paranormal subject that I'm not going to go into today. It's literally, I do have some interest in that direction, but you need some applicable data. Like, there's a nice little tree break over there if you're into stick structure stuff. There's one right there too, evident to all the deadfall I was talking about. So, like last week, I could go that way and end up kind of sort of where I think I am, but I am going to do the cheater's way and follow my tracks back just because they're there and I have that, so we don't get turned around. Once I have, like, if I find a pattern to like the past reports, mine, and then I'll apply them to others, as much as I take some of the BFRO stuff with a grain of salt. Some are more than others. And this may seem like a bias, but in the last few years, if you haven't noticed, a lot of these reports are being done by one person, being Matt Moneymaker, and that, I gotta take that as a red flag. Because I do know the historical side of the Bigfoot community. I know that the BFRO has had, in earlier years, a mass exodus or two of curators, mainly because they didn't like the way the place was run. This is what brought us the AIBR, the ABS, and the SRI. Derivative groups that began, excuse me, somewhere around the time back in the early 2000s when I first got into the subject more. Not going to go through the whole history of that, but lack of certain leaders of that group seemed to be the common thread as to why they didn't stay there. That being said, I have actually been out in the woods with people who are in the BFRO, and it does have decent people in there. Sorry, not him. And from the interaction we never had when he was in Connecticut for the town hall, it's probably, the feeling seems to be mutual, so oh well. Again, I'm not thoroughly one to force my presence on people. In fact, that's one thing that some people do that I find very off-putting myself, so. And when I was making reference, to regional mannerisms, that could be the New Englander in me. I'm just not. Which isn't actually the case, because I've actually started talking to people in the woods in Vermont, and granted, Vermonters are fairly friendly people. I have, in certain areas, gotten to actually recognize certain locals that get out in the woods, and I know a few of them by name. and had some interesting interactions with them, including one where I helped somebody navigate VA paperwork of all things. Mainly because I used to work there. And I can see where their bureaucracy had helped her get to where she was. I'll leave that to your perceptions, because I don't want to delve into it. It's her business and not mine. Other than to say, I agree with a certain person on a YouTube channel who is a nurse who she kind of like gives medical advice, and the one thing she says I agree with is if you go into a place where you're going to be due to like sedation or something in a diminished capacity because of something like that, have somebody there to advocate for you who you trust. Not some random social worker you don't know, like a family member, or in my case, like my significant other, or something like that, because one, in her case, she was a primary caregiver to a person with Alzheimer's and dementia, and has actually already gone through that a lot, so she does have a bit of a skill set in that. And not that I don't have enough sense, like when you have a doctor saying, well, here's this new medication, like first thing out of my mind, I don't know why we're on this all of a sudden, but first thing out of my mouth is, what are the side effects? Because there's all these commercials out there right now, and they rattle through the side effects of some new medication for something. And more than once I've been left with the impression, the actual ailment you're treating does not sound quite as bad as the potential side effects, because side effects include coma and death. No thank you. A little much. If those are the side effects, even in rare cases, no thanks, man. The things I wrestle with are things that can easily be controlled through my own self-discipline. I think the worst one, I've covered mental health and other things, and everybody has to some degree, with all the outside influences in the world today. You can feel free to disagree with me, but I would argue that most people have at least some minor OCD, like door lock jiggling coping mechanism thing that is at least on the neuroses level of mental health, quote-unquote, isms. Some people go deeper into the well than that, and which is one thing I think I glossed over in responding to the guy and his criticisms. I clearly do have a different take on the overall subject. There is the subject itself. What is the thing that we seek to discover? There is the history and the psychology of the community itself. And even if I was going to try to guess my way back, the big rock I came by is right over there. So, should I decide I'm bored with doing the windy freaking repetition of the thing back here, I could do that, because that is a pretty obvious landmark. It's a big semi-pyramid looking rock thing. As the two extra magazines in my pocket rattle against each other. But I have touched on that. I have my own demons, one of which is literally door jiggling OCD. I can't leave a room without jiggling a lock 3 times. And in case you're curious, yes, it literally has to be 3 times. 4 times is irrelevant, 2 times is not enough, and it will bother me. It will make me twitchy if I don't do it. Is it rational? No. The funny thing for me, though, is that I actually realize why I'm doing it as I'm doing it. It's like, this isn't rational, yeah, but I still have to do it. Why? Because it's an obsessive friggin' compulsion. You're obsessing on it until you do it. That is the stupid reality of it all. And it is a stupid reality, but it's still the one you have. The other one, a bit trickier but a lot less frequent, is claustrophobia. And something like a phobia, I think, is a slightly different beast than something like if you're bipolar or something like that. Because bipolar and things like this require, or if you have like an acute anxiety that's more chronic, something like that needs, I don't know why we're doing medical stuff, but I just got to finish the thought in my head because, again, OCD. Where you might need some kind of a psych med, but there you have to be careful too, because as I got interested in some of this stuff, you read a lot of cases where people are prescribed meds and they don't do what you think they do, and they often make things worse, which kind of makes you wonder how much the psych crew is actually guessing, or how much you might be a guinea pig for big pharma. What's this one do to them? Because I have read more than a few cases where people were in a diminished capacity of a psychological nature, and the people allegedly helping them were like, sign this, while they're in a diminished capacity, which is downright predatory. Or at least apathetic to your state of mind. Suddenly, one or two people that came in for something minor wonder why they've been committed for the next 3 months of their life when they didn't need to be. And the reason is, you probably signed a form while you were like under a lot of medication, which goes into a level of abuses that are deeper than that. I say that because a lot of the places in Connecticut that do mental health have been investigated for patient abuses, which is all the more reason why you need an advocate if you ever found yourself in a weird situation like that. I think I've been subjected to 2 fraudulent wellness checks that were meant out of malice. Kind of a soft medical equivalent of a swatting in the intent. And 9 times out of 10, the person responding with a badge, and it usually is a cop or 2, quickly enough sees what it is, and they have the option then to pursue a false report thing, which, if it ever happens again, I am more than happy to have prosecuted, and I would press charges. Because again, like I said before, up to a year in prison and can be up to a $10,000 fine. That's a lot of meatballs, folks. But the difference between claustrophobia and something like bipolar, bipolar is every day. Claustrophobia is a reaction to, it basically is the fear of being confined. I had an experience at the VA where, and I'm not going to trigger myself, I'm not going to go too deep into the specifics, but it's basically an overwhelming feeling of being trapped. When you're in an area, when you're in a situation where you can't get out of a situation and you immediately have no idea of when the situation's going to be one you can remove yourself from. And if you're inferring upon that there's a social component to it, there is. Although it's not as intense. The poster child perfect storm version of that is what happened to me in the VA, where I spent half the day trapped in a very defective elevator. And you're basically the rat trapped in a metal box, which is what it felt like. And I'm not going to go deeper into it because I will trigger myself a lot. To this day, it still is something where my mood will notably, it's already starting to happen. We're going to not go too deep into this. I'll try to keep my voice from cracking. But it doesn't happen as often, though. I think the last time it happened before that was when I was in college. Similar circumstances, but the thing about it is, kind of like claustrophobia, your reaction can be one moment irrational, and then you realize you're in the situation you're in. You go from 0 to 60, and you're like, it is like basically like a full-blown panic attack and or a manic episode. And it doesn't always happen loudly. For me, the last time it happened it was very internal. How do I get over this thing without killing myself? Do this. Hop, step. Okay. And those are probably the worst episodes because they're quiet. They're all internal. But you will wear them forever. and they're very intense and very sucky. They really suck. I probably should not have brought that up. How bad? Bad enough I had to pull off the highway on the way home from work that day and stop in a commuter lot and take like 20 minutes to breathe it out. It doesn't happen often. Like, it won't happen this year probably, but it can be bad. It's not as bad when you do the social part, because that's just like you're in an uncomfortable social situation and you can't immediately get out of it, but it's not as intense as like primal flight or fight. I need to get out of here, and you can't. That's what the worst case scenario, perfect storm is. Again, why I'm talking about this, I have no idea. But the reason it can be so intense for me is couple that with the OCD, and I can't really stop talking about it till I finish the thought and get to the end of it. And we'll move on to other things now, but the difference between something like that and the heavy hitters for like real mental illness, like bipolarism, dissociative disorder, which is bordering on like multiple personalities and things like that, like really things that can really mess up your life, or schizophrenia, because my girlfriend's mother had that. Sorry if you didn't want me to say that, but I did. They are things that affect you on a regular basis and you need meds for. For my particular ailment, you need... Some things have like what they call aversion therapy. This is more like... I don't know if you call it confrontational theory. You kind of have to confront it and desensitize yourself to it. And I will have to admit that after my half day as a guest of the United States government against my wishes, I was taking stairs like up 4 or 5 flights in the middle of July. It was hot in the stairwell. Didn't care. Did not care. I avoided that for the better part of a year, and then I found a therapist. Because the tricky part I found, I don't know if it happened the last time before that. Being in college, you probably had more distractions. How do I put this? If you don't talk it out or you don't resolve it in your head, there is some part of that that will manifest into PTSD, and I do have some of that from a few things. But that again is something where, depending on what causes it, therapy is better than medication because you have to talk about it. Not that you're necessarily ever going to find a happy place with it, but you can once you understand what it is, because for a long time I didn't know what the hell it was, and this last episode I had with it, I had to understand what it was, because it was like, okay, what is that? That's happened before. And it is such an intense thing. It ain't nothing. You can be inside your own head and kind of want to smack yourself in the head and question yourself, like, what is going on with you right now? Because you are not yourself, and you're not in your right mind. And know that at the same time that you are actually doing it at the same time. And I don't know why I'm sharing this, but I had to go looking for what it was. And at first, I talked to a few friends about, like, well, that's claustrophobia. Like, no, it's not. I am in a small space, driving in my car every day, doesn't bother me. I can be in a small space in any one of a number of scenarios. When I go from A to B in the elevator and all things go smoothly, it's fine. When I'm flying in a little metal cigar and I'm up there, I don't like flying, but I don't have like a phobia level fear of it either. So needless to say, that's not what it is. It's fair to say it's similar, but it's not that. There's actually a Peanuts episode where they have Lucy trying to diagnose Charlie Brown. She goes through all these things, and I think it's on the Christmas special. And that's kind of the mental process I went through. Like, what is this? Because this last time it was really, really, really bad, and it wasn't nothing. I probably should not have driven home. I probably, if it had been a because I'm not a veteran, the amount of medical attention they can give you at a VA hospital is rather limited. They have what they call employee health, and they'll basically give you a Tylenol or a Band-Aid and say walk it off or something. I mean, because you're not a veteran. It's just the way that system is set up, and I get that, but I probably should have approached somebody soon, because when I say it was affecting me, it was affecting my sleep patterns a lot. So when you actually feel something like that, I guess the moral of the story is don't ignore it, because it's not nothing. Your body is reacting to stress from something, and if it can't define it, that makes it worse. Once I hit upon claustrophobia, I'm reading this and I'm going through, like, it doesn't cover all the aspects I'm talking about. And incidentally, fear of elevators is an actual very specific phobia, but it's manifested in other areas for me beyond being in an elevator. That's not what it is. It's like it's not that specific. But it is more specific than just general claustrophobia. Then I discover claustrophobia. And I'm reading through all the aspects of that. I'm like, this is, you're hitting all the buttons of what this is. So now I have, once you know what it is, it's kind of like when, there was a time when stalking was this thing that people did to you. But it really wasn't until you gave it a term that you could break it down and define it, what it was. And once it's specified like that, then you can make it illegal and say the following activity definable as this is illegal, and if you're caught doing it, you're going to get it, kind of thing. We took that into a much greater depth than I had intended to. Back to New Hampshire. Specifically, I am going to look at some reports and put it into a certain greater significance around an area, but I was given an area that's kind of a large state park, and I can use that as like a center of the, it may branch out from there in other adjacent areas, but I have to get acquainted with the area first. And it took me a while to do that in Vermont, so. Beginnings of a new project. I have been up in the Sunapee area. Nice area, I never had any activity there, so de-emphasized in favor of other stuff going on in Vermont at the time. We have been rambling for a while, largely to test walking through the woods like this. And I'm going to take a segment break now to cover a little bit of distance, and we'll be back in a bit, but I did want to test the camera. I think we've got some good basis for that, and I wanted to cover some things too, and I think I've done that as well, so we'll be back in a bit. We're on the other side of the stream. I kind of had run out of things to talk about in a non-rambling nature, and probably covered some stuff that went off the track a bit, but maybe those are the interesting ones. I don't know. I leave that to the audience. Speaking of which, we find ourselves at the point in the video where I do the YouTuber thing, because we're about where we are with this one. It's quiet out here today. I originally had thought that there were the there was a chance for either a repeat of the infrasonic thing going on or some migratory activity. So far, not so much. And that's all luck of the draw, you know that. And anyway, until next time, like, subscribe, leave comments or criticism. As you've seen today, I do respond. Maybe long-windedly, but I do. And until the next time, we will catch you the next time. And because this camera doesn't really cut out as smoothly as the other one, we'll have to do our best and say we'll catch you next time, and bye.